This is Technically Legal, a podcast about legal technology, innovation in the legal industry, and the impact tech is having on the law. I'm Chad Main, the founder of legal services company Percipient, and on today's show, I'm talking to President and Chief Legal Officer of Salesforce, Sabastian Niles. We're talking about a recent open letter he sent to the legal community in which he argues that the time for the AI pilot is over and that the legal industry needs to get serious about really using agentic AI lest they get left behind. On today's show, I welcome back Sabastian Niles. He's the President and Chief Legal Officer for Salesforce. A few weeks ago, Sabastian published an open letter to the legal community, but points of it can be applied to many other professional service organizations. He told me he was motivated to write this open letter after many conversations with others in the industry about AI usage and adoption. If I had to sum it up, the time to mess around with AI pilots is over. The tech is here. It's being used by many in legal very well, and if your organization doesn't get on board and really start working with it instead of dabbling, you're going to get left behind. During the conversation, Sabastian used a term that I love, agentic theater, talking about innovation but not really doing anything about it. Why does he mention agentic theater? Because his open letter also draws upon ideas from Clayton Christensen's book, Innovator's Dilemma. The Innovator's Dilemma occurs when companies only focus on their most profitable customers and improve only existing products, rather than paying attention to innovation that's going on in the real world, and they end up becoming obsolete. So, to avoid the Innovator's Dilemma, what does Sabastian think law firms and legal departments should do? He says they need to move beyond basic automation towards agentic workflows. That's where AI agents can reason, use data, and take action. Specifically, he offers 4 suggestions. The first one is using a system of engagement. In his mind, a system of engagement is a unified digital interface that replaces a bunch of fragmented tools with seamless, real-time collaboration between law firms and their clients. He says the next step is a system of agency. What does he mean by that? That's an ethically governed AI framework that scales capacity and reimagines legal service delivery while maintaining strict human oversight and compliance. The third system Sabastian talks about is a system of work. That's a trusted enterprise-grade platform that integrates daily professional applications into a cohesive, high-performance workflow. And finally, the last system that Sabastian encourages legal professionals to adopt is a system of context. That's a secure single source of truth for client data that ensures strategic counsel is grounded in history while protecting the attorney-client privilege. Also, as we'll hear today, Sabastian and his team are putting their money where their mouth is. They've also already built out several agentic AI tools, including one that helps outside counsel comply with billing guidelines, and also a few things they use internally for intake triage. I know we hear all the time about AI replacing professionals, but what Sabastian's shooting for is to scale human capacity without losing human accountability.
The era of the mere AI pilot or experimentation, or how do you really bring together unified platforms of technology, data, agentics and the like, it's just over, and so taking the gains, both the efficiency gains, but also the effectiveness gains, from, AI, agentics technology and data, sharing it with clients, right? Those gains need to be, really, shared with clients as well as we'll talk about, right? The firm itself, right? The colleagues, the people operating within, these professions, and ultimately, which I hope we touch on, communities, right? What can that really, look like? But these aren't optional nice to haves, right, anymore. It's actually going to become prerequisites for being competitive, right? Seizing, growth, opportunities. And I also would touch on, look, the competitive advantage for law firms, for advisors, right, in this agentic AI era, will be the ones tackling this and really mastering, what I call trusted agentics, right? How do you design and deploy and implement intelligent systems that, particularly when you think of these fields, acting with integrity, right? Transparency, human aligned, purpose, and all of the, special considerations of confidentiality, privilege, and the like that's on here. But some of my views are also informed by what we're doing here, right, at Salesforce, right, a global company, yes, enterprise AI, enterprise software, but, we're a global client, right? We're a purchaser of these services. And what we're doing, right, we're building an AI native, right, trust first agentic, legal function, right? And how does that, what we're trying to do here and are doing here, that can hold the promise of the best of human, agent, human AI collaboration. And we need our partners.
The law firms. Partners being law firms and other vendors.
Exactly. The vendors, the partners, the law firms to, at a minimum be with us on this journey, but really embrace this so that they are, right, able to be successful and not be left behind.
You said there that the age of the pilot, the AI pilot is over. I want you to expand on that though, because we're building our own AI tools here at my company and stuff. And I feel like every day's kind of a pilot because stuff's moving so fast and we got to change it so fast. Like, what do you really mean by that? You're not saying don't keep testing and stuff, but when you say the pilot's over, what do you want to see your law firms doing, your other professional services doing? Obviously not dabbling, but what does that mean?
Some of it is you can go into the deeply practical, but also some of it is a mindset, right? An approach. Viewing these items not as just technology challenges or data challenges, though that obviously underpins a number of the kind of opportunities here, but recognizing it is a relationship challenge for law firms, and it is, I think, going to be one of the defining leadership challenges and opportunities for firms of all sizes. And so, the point of exactly, continuing to look. Yes, experiment, in the sense of let's test, let's train, but not view it as some adjacent or, okay, I'll do one or two pilots where it's, almost a little bit, right? Is it sort of agentic AI theater? Right, or be able to just tell, tell a set of clients or whatnot, "Yes, yes, and we're doing this," but they not really kind of embracing what does it mean, right, at the leadership of the firm to say, "This is serious and real, and we're gonna reimagine our processes," "What's our client service delivery model," right? "How do we calibrate the risk and the opportunity around this," and really have it be a more core part of, what's the unified intelligence that they're bringing forth as one of their key, right, service offerings.
Now, I want to go back to the thing you opened with there, the relationship challenge. So you're saying the relationship between in-house counsel, outside counsel needs to change. So let's draw the dichotomy here. What do you view as the old school relationship versus what you perceive as being a very positive, productive, new school relationship? The time of this change here.
So look, I think if you do step back, it is the question for I think so many of these firms, and really again in every jurisdiction, in every specific practice group, specialty, and whether the firm is just started, sort of a week ago, a month ago, have been around for decades or even some that are hundreds of years. Is look, what is the relationship that the law firm and professional service advisory firms wish to have with their clients, and what's the relationship clients wish to have with their firms? And so when you think of what the opportunities are around some of it is here already, some of it is you kind of see where the roadmap is going, right? Around AI, agents, technology, and data is all right. Are the firms willing to figure out how to bring their really institutional intelligence to bear for the benefit of their clients and unlock, right? What does it mean to have the full force and power of a firm across all their different practice groups? Again, all the learning, the tribal knowledge, the tacit knowledge, but also the best of what they're doing with their and the best, how are they bringing forth to the clients a fresh view of what's their system of engagement within the firm and then with clients. What's their system of agency? Where are they going to have their partners, their counsel, their associates be augmented by AI and agents for the clients, benefits? How does the system of work evolve? And then, what's that core system of context so that as a client, look, I'll, come at from like the client side. Okay, how are we getting better outcomes, deeper insights, superior service and offerings? But yes, is the firm sharing savings, cost efficiencies, new updated business models?
What I think I hear you saying is, at some level, is the silo problem, right? Like you may hire law firm A to do litigation, and they might have excellent employment attorneys, but either because it could be an external factor or a lot of times internal factors of the law firms, everything's siloed. You don't even know that they have excellent employment lawyers too. So it seems to be what you're saying there too is use AI to talk within your firm and capture that information and that expertise. Is that what you're alluding to there?
As a former partner of, Wachtell, Pros and Cats, I have perspectives, right? But what I've heard from quite a few number of law firms around this point is wait, this is an opportunity. This is a growth lever for these firms in a very increasingly competitive environment, right? Not only from other law firms, but again, in certain places, other professional service advisory firms that have kind of taken a look at what is the work that legal firms are doing? What do companies or governments, nonprofits, what do people need? And said, oh wait, there are elements there that as you unpack the steps, non-law firms are able to, right, step in. You have alternative service providers. But, to your point, How do you appropriately cut across the silos? There's the companies, when I sit with customers sort of in the, broader private sector, right? Everyone is grappling with this. And that's why one of the, the elements is when you have a unified technology platform is how do you enable structured data, unstructured data, enable all those silos to, in a sense, they continue to exist, but how do you have them not be impediments and blockers? And to your point, this becomes a growth opportunities for the firms because look, if they when they do it right, they will have more of this, essentially like a 360 view of the client, of increasingly, right, of the industries that they're seeking to serve. And then I think be more collaborative within the firms themselves, but also in terms of what does it mean for law firms to collaborate with their clients? Some of it is, look, we have some firms that are using Slack and how they're using it within their own firm to share in line with the insights. Obviously, particularly within the context of do you have access controls? Do you have walls? Do you have privilege 100%? But it's just enabling a much more sometimes fluid, organic type of collaboration because particularly with sophisticated clients, the clients are pretty sophisticated in some of these areas too. And so again, it's what's that overall kind of set of that joint outcome that gets to be delivered between a firm and its client in matters of importance.
Just a few episodes ago, I had this made me think of it. There's a new piece of technology out there called Passel, and it's mainly for law firms and professional services firms. But it's really cool because what it does is it takes AI and goes through a firm's their expertise, the articles that are being written by the lawyers and stuff. Because someone in San Diego may not know about a guy in London that wrote this great article, and it shares all that. That's the type of stuff. What it reminds me of is what you're talking about there is that like sharing the knowledge within the firm and the expertise.
How does a firm itself work within itself, right? Across the practice groups. Also, though, across the levels, the hierarchy, and look, the way AI, technology, data, agent force, whatnot are kind of playing out, it will change some of the structures within firms. Is it leverage ratios? Is it how does work get assigned? How does work get delivered? But to your point of using it, we have a number of law firms that, when you mentioned sort of Slack, our own internal functions, 94% of our legal team are using, one of our solutions called Slackbot. I mentioned it because it's enabling us to bring together context, conversation, action directly in the flow of work. And when we're also putting our law firms on like the Slack Connect channels, everything is just happening so much faster. And like you said too, the firm itself is figuring out how do they bring together all their knowledge, insights, their own kind of playbooks, the templates. It's not just it's the future, it is the present, at least with the firms that are seeking to be leaders in this space. But I would honestly offer just seeking to stay competitive.
Right. Specifically, why law firms? I know you're an attorney, of course, that's where you're gonna go with your angle, but is Salesforce also like, is there an open letter to engineering firms or accounting firms? Why law firms? What motivated you to go and write this letter?
It's a good idea. Let's continue the the platform or the theme. And it is funny. I can imagine. There are a number of industry verticals I do lean into, regulated industries, right? Also, being one of them. So, look, certainly where I've had the opportunity both to sit firm side, also to operate in the context of okay, now I'm a right, or my global teams, we're a purchaser and consumer of these particular sets of services. Also, just, sitting in the C-suite of a global technology company, I'm very passionate around how do you calibrate risk and opportunity? And that's why I'm very bullish on law firms may be, look, uniquely situated. Again, if they tackle trusted agentics and these other areas effectively, law firms could be the core enabler of responsible, trusted AI transformation really across, the business world. And certainly what we find internally here at Salesforce, right, is the companies are able to really master and tackle the opportunity, but also the complexities around AI, and agents are also the ones that will be trusted to govern and impact a lot of these areas in AI externally. And that's where increasingly law firms have to be able to have a credible, thoughtful, dynamic proposition on these areas because it's part of, it's going to be part of panel selection, part of ongoing assessments, but also part of this, again, client trust that we know, okay, these firms are grappling with these topics and see the opportunities, but also the risks. not just viewing it as this sort of peripheral tool. And in which case, look, they're behind on the technology, but they actually end up being behind on the relationship because companies and clients, what are we purchasing? We're purchasing legal intelligence, we're getting judgment, right? We're getting, ideally the best of what each of these firms have to offer. And again, this piece, technology, data, AI, right, agentics has to be part of what's the unified platform that a firm is providing.
You said there that legal, which I think some people they might not have thought about this, could be the impetus for a lot of change, implementing AI across many different industries. But counterpoint, I guess, is and explain how your position there or your idea there fits in with the friction that look out of all the professions out there, legal is one that AI can definitely eat into because it can do a good chunk of the work. And so where people needed lawyers prior, they may not need them as much anymore because AI is getting them part of the way there. So how does that impact your belief that law firms need to lead and can be the impetus for this change?
What you've highlighted, I think, is the core innovator's dilemma that law firms and with all industries and companies are you're facing, but like with all of the innovators' dilemma is, okay, the risk is like successful incumbents, they get disrupted by new entrants, by new models, new approaches, right? And there's examples in the, is it Blockbuster, Netflix, there's so many different interesting, examples. But each of those concerns that you raise are again items, considerations to tackle rather than become justifications to not innovate, to really fundamentally to not innovate in this area. And I am bullish on, again, the opportunities for the legal industry to potentially be an exemplar of how to make all these innovations work in contexts where we really care about risk, right? We care about downside. We care about these kind of mission critical areas. And I think this more broadly around the legal industry as well. Yes, as you unpack processes, the type of work, the type of service, and the like, you find different sets of pieces, right? What gets automated? What gets sort of agentified? How does the whole become greater than the parts? But these sets of items, okay, that in, let's just say the world, but I think for any company, any context, any law firm, there is a abundance of issues where lawyers and legal judgment and legal professionals are critical. And it's only becoming more so as we get in this very kind of fascinating and complicated time around, is it uncertainty? Is it ambiguity? All these areas. But that's also why, in order for legal professionals to not just like keep up, but be able to tackle all these issues at scale, honestly, this level of AI, technology, data, agentics could not have come at a more important time. And so look, just like I think AI is just going to create in a way like even more software around sort of all these critical areas, and with agents and everything. The world that we live in right now, in all its again complexity and the era that we're in or in very well soon be in, lawyers are going to become even more important. But in order for it all to work, I think legal professionals have to be able to focus more on where they're able to really kind of deploy the right judgment.
You can't automate discretion, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Now, by the way, on that point, I may share with you with our chief AI scientist. He and I wrote an article about, it's like the 19th century banking problem that AI has not solved. But I highlight this because we are in a new era where for really the first time, machines are going to be asked to not just apply rules, but even though that's really critical, right? The deterministic, element and the probabilistic element, but they're going to have to navigate standards. So actually these interesting elements of discretion is also, I think, an area where the legal industry and lawyers should be uniquely situated to help grapple, right? And define, just like, look, I think lawyers have done, sort of in the past, define the appropriate, what are the parameters, what are the rules, what are the contexts, so that you very wisely, effectively govern this technology at the pace of business, at the pace of innovation that is in there. And, Chad, as you and I have talked about before, I also have a point of view that it's not like innovation is over here and trust is over there, right? I think trust is yes, it's a license to operate, But trust is a growth lever, trust is a competitive advantage, and trust operates as propulsion to enable the adoption, the utility, the effectiveness that is actually ends up being fundamental to be able to use these technologies at scale to deliver whatever the core mission is of any given enterprise or client or team or person or industry.
Trust, right? A lot of times, why are lawyers somewhat reticent to adopt tech? They got to trust it, right? That's important. But I think there's also the construct I want to ask you about in your whole innovator's dilemma argument, or not argument. It's a fact. I agree 100%. It's gonna either you got to get on board or you're gonna be left behind. But current state for law firms in the way that they earn money and their profit structure, I think personally that it inhibits spending money on innovation because that comes out of the pockets of the partners. Do you see any kind of inherent friction there where you're asking these law firms to become more tech savvy, spend a little money figuring out how to do this, spend money in AI, but they might not be willing to do that based on how they're charging and making money today?
It is certainly the case that if a firm's most important priority is preserving the end-to-end status quo, they're preserving their service delivery model exactly as it is, preserving their pricing and billing, models exactly as they are. Again, preserving both the status quo and the legacy sets of items. Look, these firms, I believe, are going to fail. They're not going to thrive. They're not going to be competitive. I also, though, believe that the technology, again, offers opportunity for growth so that, yes, the upside and effectiveness, and again, offerings and superior insight and service, and yes, faster outcomes as well. This is part of sharing those gains with clients. And yes, sharing the savings, the efficiency, new business models on the right with clients. But I think this is tremendous benefit for the firms, for the partners.
Let's talk about that. You're the head of one of the legal departments, the biggest companies in the world. So I think there might be lawyers at law firms with this right now say, hey, you're the client. It's easy for you to say, we need to come up with these innovative ways and pass the cost savings along. What are some of your ideas there? How can your law firms work with you to pass the productivity and efficiency savings on to you at Salesforce, yet create more business for the law firm to kind of offset those savings being passed along?
We're already seeing it, right? But we're seeing lots of variation. There are some firms that, again, see this opportunity either as a look necessity. Ultimately, over time, is it like an existential threat? But actually viewing it more as okay, if they want to partner right with, look, is it the top clients or is it just actually clients who are ahead of where they are and they don't want to be, it's not great to have clients be too far ahead of where our firm is, but stepping
But
back,
that's
it's
reality, though. I think that's absolutely reality to date.
no, no, hey, that's a big, I have no comment on that. That's a big
Yeah, I'll
point.
comment.
Well, well,
I'll
but
ask again.
but to your point, right? How does the billable model? Because look, you could have. I mean, look, there's a lot of different structures, right? Certainly, is it sort of sometimes you had fixed project, right? You have flat fees. Do you have elements within certain budgets, and then what happens if it's going to increase? But even the interesting thing, like when you think about the billable model, and this is what some firms have also highlighted to me, at least the ones who are being open and thoughtful around this, is actually okay. What is the billable hour? Well, it refers to a unit of work measured by amount of time. Well, okay, technology, data, AI, yes, enables more work to be done in given units of time. So if you're going to stay in the billable hour model, you either decide more things, either more work and impact gets delivered within the same units of time, or you're figuring out how are you providing a much superior offering and set of services and outcomes to justify the same sets of areas. And then, look, I think, like as with anything, could you get more, can a firm get more work from companies when they start to show how they're bringing again, kind of the full force and power of the firm and leveraging these tools in effective, risk adjusted, thoughtful ways? But there is an element where, for a lot of firms, this actually has to be part of, you can call it attrition reduction, preservation of their existing margins and the like. And look, I think the other benefit for firms is how do they ensure they are an employer of choice and even a partnership of choice for their own partners and the associates, for the partners, the associates, and staff? And technology and AI in particular can be used to provide expanded fluency, right development, capacity, because they're going to be, looking, whether it's an AI native generation or say, hey, we want to be defining what does the 21st century, 22nd century law firm of the future look like, and also be attractive to the next generation, even the current generation, right, of professionals, and also limit their own regrettable attrition of their own partners and counsel and associates, the ones who, and I'm seeing this more and more in the legal industry. There are teams, leaders, folks, and it's interesting, of all levels of tenure. That's the interesting thing. You have it at different levels, but some are trying to innovate. They're getting stifled or blocked within their own kind of the law firm or advisory firm ecosystem. And a couple of them are saying, wait a second, this is creating more opportunity. Are they going to go start their own firms that are competing? Or do you find a way for, again, successful, call them incumbent firms? How do you build your own sort of team within a firm that has that space to innovate, to drive, to come up with additional solutions working with clients, and then have that seeded and occur elsewhere? It's going to become a retention challenge, just like it's a relationship challenge with the clients. But also, again, I think it's a big, opportunity. And look, we've also talked about, Chad, the element is, okay, what is the legal industry, right? And it's law is a profession and it's also a business. But the profession part, I do think there's an opportunity here to strengthen the profession's standing. And as you create more capacity, how can the profession do more for communities? Is it through expanded pro bono impact? Is it through law firms seeing, how do we bring again these technologies so that they can serve more, sort of a broader set of population? So I just see it as it's just become such an imperative. And look, everyone's continuing to learn as they go along. I had one lawyer had approached me and said, "Well, are my clients really kind of pushing me on this?" He's like, "Some."
I think it's sometimes incumbent on you as the clients to push for this.
That's one of the reasons for the open letter. I outlined in there, here are some just modern realities, which, not all firms fully appreciate, or all levels or people within the firms. My open letter is being read by a lot of executive committees. It's also being read by a lot of the disruptors, folks around these different areas. So the example, I was going to give of this one lawyer who, I think is really terrific, was said, are clients pushing for this? He's like, in part, yes, but he's like, also in part, no, because, and it was interesting what he said. He goes, one, when I think of the service and the conversations I'm having, with my clients, I'm giving this broader set of advice. It's business advice. It's what's the context? It's how are we going to tackle these sets of issues? He's like, also, I use value-based billing. I really kind of work with the client to think about what are their outcomes and how am I going to deliver that and what's the appropriate structure around that and where's the firm taking risk. And he gave me an example of, one of his, partners. She kind of tackles all this and she says, well, wait, this lets me provide even sharper service to this. And when I was talking to her and when she kind of outlines the relationship she has with the clients, I'm like, well, sounds to me that is what AI has to be able to enable all these firms at scale.
And you talk about that. You talk about that to get around the innovator's dilemma and not be left behind. You say the most competitive firms will use integrated AI, data 360, and application platforms to connect the dots. What are you talking about there specifically? You've already kind of alluded to capturing internal data and expertise in the firm, but I think you're also talking about grabbing information from the client itself and figuring out how holistically to tie this together, right?
You're exactly right. It goes to your siloed point, goes also to these elements, which is, okay, when you think of, again, I've kind of laid out there a system of engagement, system of agency, system of work, system of context. And your point on the context, right? The key is unified intelligence. How does the firm get and have, and then, candidly, like leverage for the client, this 360 view? 360 view, yes, of the client's priorities, business, matter history, but also the 360 view of the broader context in which the client is operating. And that context has got to be grounded, right? In the firm secure, is it the system of record? Is the actions, informed by accurate data? Is it protected by strict confidentiality guardrails, right? Architected to preserve attorney-client privilege, work product protections where those apply? Because again, they can't sacrifice or do shortcuts around those items. But again, those considerations cannot be used as an excuse to not innovate in the ways that will be most effective for clients, for that firm, for their colleagues, and for communities.
So the data 360 part, you guys are Salesforce, CRM, a bunch of other features and stuff, but that's a lot of data. Are you seeing instances in the legal world where law firms are connecting with Salesforce with a client and collecting information that's helping them provide the legal services? Do you have some real world use cases?
So look, we're doing that ourselves as try to being, agentic first, agentic legal function, along sort of with others. But yes, we're seeing firms embrace that upside of what if we could really have a 360 view and then bringing together all the different data, the inputs, the structured data, the unstructured data across the firm, again, in appropriate ways. And what they find, it's actually very interesting. Some of the firms find it's more joyful for how their internal teams and partners and associates are collaborating around those sets of ways. Because, it's like the old, kind of the classic idea was, all right, one law firm partner can just go down the hall and talk to their colleague around sort of these different sets of areas. Look, now you have dispersed teams, you got multiple offices, you've got also different practice groups. And so where firms have these, is it collaboration tools? Is it, again, pulling together the right data from different sets of items, then making it, this is why firms have told me Slackbot has been so interesting because it just provides in real time, integrating the different data and the insights and the information in ways that are immediately useful to the legal professionals at the firm. Because look, yes, you have some teams and firms that are trying to advise specifically on AI. And as you can imagine, there are a whole host of set of areas. And in some ways, they tend to be some of the more forward-leaning folks, being mindful around risk. But all of these law firms, right, and the leaders, everyone has their own personalities, priorities. But their priority, right, has to be, okay, how do I kind of tackle these issues for the client? How do I navigate their risk? How do I solve their problems? How do I deliver on these, different sets of priorities? And AI technology data agents have to operate in service of that.
You talk about that in the article too. You internally there in the Salesforce legal department already using some agentic AI. What are some examples you can talk about? How real world examples? We always, everybody talks about AI and I got to use this, you got to use that, but a lot of times what gets lost is how it's really actually being used right now in April 2026. Like, what are you guys doing there internally?
One thing we are also doing is how do we make candidly like life easier for our partners, for our law firms. And so, for example, we created, LCIO, an outside counsel support agent because law firms sometimes find, how do you navigate a company, like ours, just like with all their clients? And so this agent will help the law firms understand, yes, it could be our requirements, it could be elements around billing, it could be this, but that is an element where it's like we said, okay, let's be helpful to these law firms. And yes, it also, helps with our own sort of sets of folks. We also have areas where intake, how do we triage and assign the different sets of work that comes in? We have some task that took hours before. And now we're getting, is it actually like truly we try to measure it, all kind of legal teams. It's always what's the measurement infrastructure, right, relative to some other functions. But we really are sometimes getting like 100x faster speed and higher accuracy. And we get hundreds of thousands of requests per year. And so working on how are we embedding, and yes, for us, it's Agentforce, it's our customer 360, it's our data 360, all these things, but embedding AI agents throughout almost every aspect of the work. Is it triage, I said, is it contracting? Is it translations? Is it the compliance sets of checks? Yes, we've got to figure out very thoughtful on what's the human oversight, what are those right protocols around these sets of items, but it's really fundamentally changing, right? How do we operate? How do we govern the technology? How do we partner with folks? And also, again, with each other. Because we also internally, we've got to figure out how do we resurface important information or findings quickly? How do we make decisions more quickly than we did. But also, again, ultimately, how do you get to better outcomes and to better calibration of risk and opportunities?
As we're closing out, I know we're winding down time. I got two questions for you. Going back to the LCAI, the outside counsel app you created, how do they access it? Is it through Slack? Do you go log into Salesforce? What are they doing to actually get this information? Like, hey, I got a question about billing guidelines. How do they get there?
We've got our own portal that we built on, some of our own solutions and the like. And so once you're part of our kind of our own ecosystem on there, it's actually very easy how you kind of access these agents. When you're on Slack, that ends up being the absolute what we're finding and hearing from firms, but also just internally, that's the easiest way. We like run our whole company at Salesforce, right, on Slack. We're running the entire so many of our functions on Slack. We have a section where you just pull up the agent. And so even in in the legal context, you just kind of go through what's our legal employee agent, right? What's the manager agent? And then tackling each of these, sets of issues. Because what I also want to do, and again, with oversight, and the like, I can get like thousands, even more, of some of the more routine legal queries. We've now built the technology, data, and the like to get those addressed and answered by, what do the business teams need? Like, yes, what are the sales teams? What are kind of all, we got 84,000 employees and then we've got our much broader ecosystem. Okay, there's a lot of things we want to make sure they get the right answers on, but they get them fast. And that then expands the capacity of the legal professionals, but also, compliance professionals and, other folks to focus on the things that really require them to, engage the more complex sets of issues, the areas that are really cross-functional. So you've got to be pulling together all these teams. And again, I think we're all, on a journey on this, but how do we leverage these tools also to make the experience of our incredible employees? Can we do it? Can we make it more sustainable? Can we make it more joyful? Can we make it, yes, more productive and even, pleasurable so that, again, they're able to grow, they're able to become super fluent in this, they're able to lead in these different areas. I think this is such a unique, powerful moment in the industry. And I want to see the legal industry not just like keep up with this, but lead. Because again, I think the approach, the mindset, the care that lawyers bring to bear on so many issues is exactly what is needed at this time so that these tools can manifest the best of human and Asian, human AI collaboration to deliver, look, what we need at scale in so many different ways.
On that note, last question then. This is your hope. It's my hope too. There is an opportunity. I know it can be done. But we talk about theory and what AI can do. Stuff. What's one thing that people in legal can do right now or tomorrow to take a step in the right direction to try to solve some of the issues that your open letter surfaced?
So as always, I'd love to just give one, right? But I do think it's actually one thing to do. The typical answer there is, okay, use this particular tool or use this. I would actually say the element is establish executive accountability around these areas. And then who's going to be thinking about, yeah, what are the trust guardrails around this, right? Are they assessing what the workflows, the actual work of the firm? Where is current AI technology data use? Make some choices around where can we and how are we going to scale human judgment around these areas? And yeah, how do you mandate AI literacy as a core professional skill? I tell my internal teams, look, technology, data, AI, agents, trusted agentics, this is now part of your craft. And then, you provide all the support. At Salesforce, we have something called the Trailblazers. Right? We created a Trailblazer model years ago that now has, tens of millions of people around the globe. But the idea with the Trailblazer is we want to democratize access to technology. And so we want all of our teams and people to be trailblazers, to be agent blazers. And I want to see all the law firms, and the law firms should be doing this with their own talent. How do you get every single person employed at a law firm or any advisory firm to become trailblazers and agent blazers on this area? And then look, get the best ideas. There's a top-down element, the executive accountability, and say, hey, we're focused on this division, but get the bottoms-up insights, right? So you're blending the beginner's mind with the expertise, the unique expertise that legal professionals in the legal industry bring to this moment and to their work.
Sebastian, appreciate your time as always. I will post a link to your open letter on our webpage, but thanks for coming on the show again.
Really appreciate it.
Okay, that's a wrap for today's episode. As always, we really appreciate you listening. If you want to subscribe, you can find us on most major podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. Also, if you like us enough, I hope you leave us a favorable review. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, this has been Technically Legal.